So this is a picture of a flip chart timeline that we did with the students. We had great fun giving them post-it notes and asking them to map on our timeline what they were using when, and giving some kind of comment on its use. And they were very, very open and honest about this. You know, as you can hopefully see in the first box, pre-arrival, we've got some sort of quantitative analysis going on, which is not surprising since I've got a lot of students who are doing that as their research method. And then we've got some more qualitative commentary going on as the year progresses. We're going to use that as a basis for our design workshop next week. So we're going to remind them of that and sort of say, do you feel that this is still representative of how you're feeling now? Because we did that back in, it was pre the Easter break. And interestingly, you know, when we asked them to kind of predict the next few months and over the summer, what they felt they might need, they struggled a bit to think of anything. And that's when we had to remind them that they did have a dissertation to write. So the next few slides are summarising what we got from the data in terms of the barriers. Again, as I said, we wanted to focus on what the barriers are for students. What do we do? What do we need to do as an institution to make PGT's lives a bit easier and to, you know, to stop framing them as being deficit? So, not surprisingly, the main issue that came about was the timing and accessibility. So the students were telling us that they needed this support year round. It's not just in the teaching time, it starts pre-arrival. It particularly continues in the non-teaching weeks. So I'm finding that at the moment. So at the moment, I'm having to negotiate with my school as to, you know, how they are going to make sure that my workload is covered, because I'm only contracted to teach in the teaching weeks, but actually I'm finding that I'm busiest. This week has just been manic with student tutorials because they've all got assignments to hand in the next couple of weeks. And also they're thinking about the dissertation. And also the school has decided that it would be a great idea for them to do a conference, which, yes, would be a great idea, but possibly not now when they're thinking about their assignments as well. So yes, really a lot more. Our university is certainly recognising that the personal tutor model doesn't really work. So there's a lot of awareness around that and trying to make sure that that is more effective. Typically, you know, not this sort of just signposting students to go and get the help themselves, but actually, you know, sort of showing them how to do things. So as I said, yeah, starting before arrival, this is something where I think a really close collaboration and consistency around messaging between academic and professional staff and the bigger sort of university comms teams on, you know, what exactly is it that PGTs are expected? Why are they here? What is the purpose of master's study? And just managing some of those expectations. And we think that there's sort of, yes, we have seen that some of those university self-access resources, like the critical thinking MOOC, like the Step Up to Masters, are increasingly being sent out to students pre-arrival when they register, so that they've got time to just think about that, process them, and think about how it, you know, what do they need to then perhaps do to prepare for when they arrive here and have to hit the ground running. Although one of our suggestions is that, I mean, this is a big ask, but it would be interesting to know, perhaps this is happening in one of your institutions already, I don't know, is possibly reducing the amount of content that we give in those first couple of weeks, just so that students can find their feet and engage with all of these other things that they're asked to think about, you know, in terms of just becoming familiar with the learning platforms that they're using. I think as a result of the pandemic, we've all learned to appreciate just how much more challenging that can be around well-being for similar reasons. And then we've got things like academic integrity. So our students are expected to do an academic integrity tutorial and show that they have passed the test. in the first few weeks of arriving. Is that well timed? I'm not sure. Does it send sort of the wrong message to students when really, you know, their priorities are making sure that they've got their accommodation sorted, opening a bank account, that kind of thing? Another recommendation, this was one that was repeated time and time again, particularly by my students, where the allocation of supervisors for dissertations is just really ineffective, and my school has recognised that, and it's something that they're working on. Partly to do with the fact that we just have got so many students now that they just struggle to find supervisors, enough supervisors who are around in semester one to cope. Also, it's around expectations, because a lot of the students feel that they're going to get a supervisor who's very expert in the area of research the student is interested in, and pretty much sort of tell them how to do the research or what to include. And that's definitely not the case. And I see repeatedly messages being sent out still now towards the end of the masters that the supervisors are there to just guide them from the side in terms of, you know, this is how you might think about the ethics of this research method, as opposed to this is how you analyse a piece of media. Communication engagement, again, is probably not a surprising theme. I don't know what it's like at your institutions, but because of the size of our university, there is a feeling of communication fatigue. I certainly feel communication fatigue. I can't imagine what it's like for students when a lot of them are having to process this in another language across different platforms. One of the things that's come out of our data as well is just, you know, the sort of awareness that expecting our students to engage with emails is a bit like expecting us to engage with faxes. You know, they're out of date. Our students want stuff on social media. They just don't understand how emails work. They're certainly not checking in. And this is something I know from leading another module, that it's not just international students, it's just that generation. My UK students as well are missing assignment information because they haven't checked their emails. And then, you know, the obvious to us, but perhaps not to all of these different teams of people who are possibly not just sort of syncing their messaging, but making sure that we're clear, consistent about, you know, when we are available and for what purposes. So this is particularly pertinent again to this thing about supervisors and personal tutors. Chinese students, for example, have told me, and I know from my own experience of working in China, and I know there's some people here online who are in China at the moment, so it'd be interesting to hear your experience, but I have to remind my students here about the work-life balance ethic here in the UK, and that, you know, tutors will not engage with you on WeChat when they're on holiday or at the weekend. So it's just sort of managing those expectations as well. And I think I say we at the University of Leeds, because I'm sure your institutions possibly do this much better than we do, could definitely do a lot more to make sure that all of those expectations are being set early on, possibly pre-arrival as well. And to me, all of this comes down to compassion. And I know we're all working, we're all time poor, we're working under very tight deadlines, heavy workloads. So I think this is just a reminder to all of us to kind of, you know, just be, well, especially for our colleagues, perhaps subject specialists who may not have had that sort of international learning experience themselves, or language learning experience, because I think if you've learned a language, you understand what it's like to operate in another language. So another key word that kept coming out of our data was about being brave. And a lot of us students talked about how we asked them about the strengths that they brought, and some of them said, oh, well, you know, I'm brave, or I've developed my bravery, I've developed my resilience in being able to just be out of my comfort zone, make that move to go and sort of talk to people who are unfamiliar to me, and sort of just bear in mind all of these different intercultural barriers around politeness, asking for help, expectations around those roles again and responsibilities. What's been quite worrying as well, but perhaps not surprising, because I think we all globally now are in a cost of living crisis. So our students are increasingly talking about those financial pressures that they're under. I think there's just the assumption again, perhaps from our institutions, that, you know, oh yeah, the international students, they've got the money, we'll charge them more. But, you know, a lot of them have made huge sacrifices to be here financially. A lot of them as well have got immense family pressures. I've had students in tears in my tutorials because they are under pressure from their parents to be here to do their masters. They were perfectly happy doing a job back home, but their family didn't deem that that job had enough status, and wanted them to come and do a job which would allow them to do a, you know, a more competitive job with a higher salary. The social integration and well-being, we all understand from doing in-sessional how important that is, the effective aspect of learning. Again, this is a quote that came up repeatedly about how hard it is to make friends. So something that's been trialled in different pockets of the university, which we're going to recommend is done more universally, is a buddy scheme, possibly having course reps as being sort of some kind of buddy for taking part in social activities. Course reps tend to be the slightly more confident, resilient people anyway, so they can be a good lead-in for those students who are a little bit more anxious about this kind of thing. And then again, just encouraging our colleagues, again, the ones who perhaps are not familiar with how, you know, the sort of the resilience that all of this takes, about just being a little bit more encouraging. I'm very saddened when students come to me and tell me that they're too scared to talk to their tutor, or their tutor's not very friendly, or their tutor kind of gave them a brush off or didn't respond to an email. And I know from talking to those tutors that it's because they're just so busy, but I don't think they really appreciate, and I'm at the receiving end of it as well, because I'll send emails out to my subject colleagues with, you know, ideas, suggestions, requests for any help, and often don't get responses to those emails. So I take it personally. So I can imagine how you know, students feel when they don't get responses. And so also something else that we've noticed that has been repeated quite a bit, and this has come from colleagues' research as well into this, is that the university is very good at telling students what they should do, what the expectations are, telling them where to go, telling them what to do. But the students, a lot of the students are telling us that they want to be shown. And again, I think this is where our in-sessional work comes in, you know, because we've got that time and expertise in embedding all of this, you know, embedding and surfacing the hidden curriculum, and then embedding those academic practices so that we can show students how to think critically rather than just telling them they've got to think critically.